Hey, what's up, comrades? Hope everyone's doing well. Go ahead and like, share, subscribe, comment, whatever. All right, so we're here to talk about Dr. Stone Season 3. And it starts off with like a movie. I ended up watching the first episode in Season 3 and then realizing I was missing like a lot of stuff because there's like characters I didn't recognize at all. And I've watched the first two episodes or seasons of Dr. Stone. I reviewed the episodes individually like way back before I decided just to combine all this stuff and do it in kind of a big review thought process. But anyway, and so then I looked through my torrent stuff and I found out that there was like this, it's like Season 3 episode 0 is how it's labeled, but it's like a movie. It's like an hour long. Anyway, it was fantastic. So we pick up with the decision that Senku has decided that we need to go investigate where the stone causing light came from, which was somewhere in South America, based on his like rough projection and like the information he got from like his dad when they found like the shuttlecraft and all that stuff, which was where the village came from, right? So if this is your first time being experienced Dr. Stone, the base idea is that the whole world got turned to stone, and then there was a couple guys, Senku and his buddy Muscles, who were able to like break free after like 3,500 years or whatever. And Senku is a super genius, and Muscles is Muscles. He's like unending endurance and strength, but a real idiot. And so what happened was over time, there was like a cave that formed around where Senku and his Muscles were, and then the Bat Guano plus other science stuff released, like kind of loosened up the stone, and they were able to break out. Then they broke out a bunch of other people. Then there was like a civil war, and Senku, like one of the people he broke out was like kind of deranged a little bit. But then they like had their little war, and a bunch of other people from like modern day were released, and it essentially everyone who's released from modern day, well, not everybody, but all the main characters are like super good at hearing, super good at archery, super good at just being like a caveman, I guess, which is that guy. They're trying to find the girlfriend of the Muscles. She's super good at crafting stuff, and she's hot as well, of course. Anyway, there was like a village that was formed because the only people who weren't on Earth was like the space crew, which included Senku's dad. And then they came back to Earth, and then they all like, there was like 3 couples, and the couples like got together and started having kids, and then it's like their progeny over 3,000 years just kind of was able to survive. Okay, so Senku wakes up, he invents the Kingdom of Science, and then science prevails. There's like a betrayal at some point for Caveman Guy after they kind of reconcile and become friends again, so they freeze him, and then they want to find a cure, which also is in South America, I guess. This is all kind of like retold to us at the beginning of this episode through like a play, because they used a lot of like the stone curing potion on workers, essentially big strong guys, and then they did the play as like propaganda. Oh, one of the guys they released is like a super propagandist / magician, so he's very useful. We'll call him the magician. So, or he's like the propagandist, the trickster god. He's great. So anyway, so in this episode, they're like, okay, so we're going to start building a ship. They have like a contest to see which ship design they're going to build. Of course, it's all for show, right? And this is explained actually at the end of this movie, where someone's like, hey, we all knew that we were just going to go with Senku's design. Like, what was the deal with having the contest? And he explains that like, oh, you want to include people in choices. You want people to believe they're choosing the things they want, because that's how you get them to like really buy in, because it's like they made that choice, which is a fact. That's super good. That's like how propaganda works, is you trick people into thinking that's the choice they would have made all along, so that they don't question it. They're just like, yeah, of course. So wake up, I guess, in real life, because that's how propaganda works too, is you think you're making the choice that you're making, but in reality someone else is manipulating you. All right. So they put on this play, they get all these guys start building a ship, and then they're trying to figure out who's going to navigate this ship. And there's a lady, she's like the best journalist of all time or whatever. And so they go talk to her, and she's like, well, I know somebody, and she really doesn't want to say it, because it ends up, they go to this island where there was like this naval academy or whatever, and then they gather all the teachers and stuff, and then she like mentions this guy again, and then she's talking about how he was like one of the richest families in the whole world, and he was arrogant, and like he built a sail ship and sailed around the world when he was like 12 years old, and his navigation skills are like unmatched and whatnot. But he's also an asshole. So Senku's like, whatever, skill outmatches personality. So he releases him, and then immediately, upon returning to the village and explaining the whole situation to him, which he like immediately shows his capabilities as like a sailor and navigator, because he like predicts the weather based on like cloud formations and shit. So it's like, all right, he's great. Anyway, after that, he invents money, but then Senku and the propagandist, who are like best friends forever, are they utilize their own propaganda and their own kind of like understanding of economics to like trick him into giving him money. And it's like a whole economic kind of funny thing going on with like, and they explain that like money doesn't have any value. It's just the value is trust. And so if people believe that it's valuable or it's worth something, then they'll use it, right? Which is facts. All fiat currency is based on just trusting that something exists, which is why it's so awful and why it just kind of, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if they print money or don't print money or any of this stuff, because it's like, as long as people have like a belief, and people in the whole world with American currency, right, then they'll use it. But if they stop believing it's a value, then it will just plummet. So it's really all about just the propaganda, which most life is. Anyway, and so then he's like, okay, well, we need to get oil to power the ship, because we can't just rely on the sails, because that would take too long, and yada yada yada. It's easier to fuel it, and he sends them off to someplace in Japan where they have like an oil field that they stopped using because it was too expensive to keep extracting oil. But then the people who go out, which is like the hearing guy, the cute girl, local girl, and then the science assistant guy, they go out and they find that the landscape, based on the good hearing guy, because he's from modern era, while the other two are from the prehistoric / modern era, current time frame. He's like, holy shit, this is like totally different. There wasn't a waterfall here in like Japan, and like Mount Fuji looks completely different and all this stuff. So they report back, because they all have like this cell phone system they developed. And Senku's like, shit, yeah, I should have realized, like, Mount Fuji it erupts every like 300 to 400 years or something. And so of course the landscape's going to change, because it's been 3,000 plus years. So like it's going to have exploded like multiple times, plus other just changes in the Earth's crust. So we need to build a flying machine, so we can build like a new map of Japan, figure out where this oil is, and then we can use that to power the ship and then navigate to South America, where we're going to track down the source of this beam, as well as get the cure for Caveman Guy. Okay. So then they get together, and we spend a lot of time with a craft girl, who's, again, she's the girlfriend of Muscles from like 2000s Japan. And she's got her crew of craftsmen. And so they get a bunch of hemp, and they use trickery and whatnot to get people to help like smash it. And then they build like, Senku builds like a loom with like the old man craftsman, or the old man science guy. And then they're able to make a whole bunch. But then they make a mistake, and they make a bunch of cloth that's not going to work because it's too breathable. And then Propagandist is like, hey, I got an idea. Let's start a department store and turn all this stuff into clothes. And so it's pretty funny. The girl's like exhausted, craft girl, from like doing all this stuff. But then they're like, hey, we want you to make pretty clothes. And she's like, yes! And so she does. And then they have like a talent show, not a talent show, they have like a fashion show, and then they start making tons of money from that, including the rich guy who invented the money based on his own corporation and like owning the oil fields or some bullshit, which they don't own because they haven't found them yet. So again, it's all bullshit, which is great because that's exactly what the economy is. It's all bullshit. So that's part of the show. So they're able to get a bunch of money, and then they're able to craft the balloon, and it goes pretty well. And then Propagandist tricks the navigator into paying them to be on the balloon by using like loss theory, which is like someone wants something because someone else has it, or because they're afraid they're going to lose it, so it becomes more valuable. It's a whole thing. Economics is crazy. People are retarded. And then science assistant shows up, and he wants to go up too. So which is good, because they go up and they're starting to see everything, and like science assistant has like a good cry because the world's round, and he just loves science. And he just wants to see and explore the whole world and everything. But then someone notices that there's like a cloud formation and that there's a storm. So they get caught in this storm, and they're kind of fucked, because previously some birds messed up the top of the balloon, so they can't like release the fire and go down necessarily, because it'll tear the balloon and they'll crash. And so they're trying to all figure, each one of them individually is trying to figure out between navigator, Senku, and assistant, what they should do. And then assistant comes out of the day, he's thinking about a time he was running away from a bear and realized the bear's faster than him, so then he had to just turn around and face the bear, because that was the only way he was going to escape that situation. And then he's like, we got to do the same thing, we got to just power through the cloud and get to the other side. And they're like, oh, that's a good idea. So they burn their last bit of like revival fluid stuff, which has like nitroglycerin in it, which is like an explosive. And then they blow it up, and Senku falls off the balloon, was able to grab on, and then they're able to shoot through the top of the clouds and survive. And they essentially take a 2-day trip by land in 2 hours, because they go from like the place where they're building the ship on the coast back to the village. And then a pretty girl or muscle girl, I guess. There's so many muscle girls. It's like, what is her name? She's the girl who is like kind of Senku's like grand niece or something, or daughter, or it's like a loose relative, because his dad is the one who kind of propagated the human species after everyone turned to stone, and this is like a girl who's a descendant. I'm trying to, we'll just call her Blondie. There's a lot of Blondies. Her older sister was the one who, that's a whole other thing. Anyway, so she's like main character girl. So main character girl, she sees them and she calls back to propagandists, and everyone's super happy and super excited. And then the boys who are on the balloon, they're like, yeah, we did it. And then Senku, they rescue Senku, who's still holding off the side of the balloon this whole time. He's got great arm strength to be doing that in a storm while they're flying away, by the way. He's like, hey, assistant, you're right. I also want to explore the world and discover science and do all this stuff. And everyone's like cheering and happy and crying, and it's great. And that wraps up the episode. And yeah, it's a great start to season 3 of the show. So fucking fun. And it's like definitely shonen-y, but like in a kind of like totally different way. Then it's got the same, it feels like I'm watching like Fairy Tail or Seven Deadly Sins or Dragon Ball or any of this good stuff, but it is like completely different at the same time. It's kind of like Food Wars. Food Wars is another excellent like shonen anime, which is like takes kind of like the general gist of like how shonen animes or manga are like done, and like does it with food. And it's like so good. It's so fucking good. So, because I'm a professional, I watched episode 1 of season 3 of Dr. Stone first, and then realized I was missing a lot of information as I was trying to recall the end of season 2, which I'd watched probably a year ago. Anyway, I knew for a fact there was something amiss. So then I dug through the files or the folders that I had torrented and found that there was a movie of sorts, and realized that I was supposed to watch that first. So that's going to happen before now. So this is all going to seem kind of crazy. Because I'm going to talk about this episode 1, which I watched before I watched like episode 0, or like the transitionary episode / movie between seasons 2 and 3. So in episode 1 of season 3, Seiku and company are returning back with a Pirate King guy who I never saw before, but is brought up in the movie, I'm assuming. And and they're on a floaty balloon. They're like on a air balloon. Air balloon? Not an air balloon. What's it fucking called? It is like an air balloon. Yeah. Like one of the big ones you like ride in. Anyway, and so they're going to build a ship, and they're going to sail to South America, where they think the source of the stone petrification ray thing is, and also to find a cure for like his best frenemy. I can't remember his name. It's the other guy. Senko? Or is he Senko? Anyway. All right. So to do that, they got to find oil, and then they got to start preparing. So they're building a ship. They're getting some other stuff ready. And it's just, this episode is like, just hits you at a mile a minute kind of situation. So they're just like cruising through looking for oil. They have like big fish feast, and you know, people are like, oh, I wish we had real meat. So then the episode turns into Minecraft, because then they're like mapping out the local area, and everyone turns into like Minecraft characters, literally Minecraft characters with like blocks and stuff. And they're like searching around, and they find like goat herd, and they find forest, and they find this, and they find that, and they find all this stuff. And finally they keep searching after they find the goats, and they find wheat. And wheat's perfect, because now we learn that like part of the reason this civilization never like expanded is because they were relying upon the fish seasons. And like, you know, a couple years before the blonde chick was born, there was like a famine of fish, so a lot of people died, and that's just perpetuating for like the 10,000 years or thousands of years that like they were all turned into stone. So they find wheat, which like changes everything. So then big tough friend with his girlfriend, along with the other big tough guys who are like obviously farm looking dudes, they start plowing and seeding and all this stuff, and then only like best friend, only his field like produces wheat, and that's because he took like seashells and poured it in there to make the acidic level of the soil less, which all comes out. And then, you know, they do that the rest of them, and they're growing wheat, and it's like, all right, now we can do this, now we can make bread. And so Seiku, who's like never baked bread before, he's doing his best. He's like, all right, let's give this a shot, and he burns the shit out of it. It tastes awful. And like the people from the modern era, like the Pirate King and the bow guy and Seiku are I think that's his name, science guy, main character, is they're like, oh, I'm gonna die. I wish I was dead. And then all like the ancient people are like, wow, this is the best thing ever. And this has happened before, right? Where he introduces food or something, and they're just like amazed by it because it's so much better than eating like bark off the tree. While like someone with like modern sensibilities is like, oh, I'm gonna die. And so then they decide unanimously that they need to find and awaken a culinary expert. Pirate captain, or I guess just navigator guy, he wants his chef, his private chef, who is also his butler, who is gender ambiguous, I guess. I'm curious to see what I'd be curious to see what it is in Japanese. Japanese culture has a bunch of different kinds of like non-gender related issues, terminology in people. So they don't really have or they haven't had like a transgender thing like ever, and the way that Americans look at it. But they do have various different kinds of like individuals who are not like, I'm not an expert at this. I have read about it like a couple times though. So you could look into it more, but the way they classify stuff is completely different. And so when they see stuff like what we're doing in the West, they're like, that's retarded, because it is retarded. But they also have kind of like quasi-gender kind of stuff going on that's been going on for a long time that's more culturally kind of relevant, almost kind of like the drag shows kind of stuff, like drag queens is one kind, but then there's like other kinds too. Anyway, I bring this all up because Francois, who we're gonna start calling the butler, who is literally the butler of the navigator back when he was like a trillionaire or whatever. They are also one of the best cooks in the whole world, and they can anticipate things. Or like their superpower is just like to be of service and to greed, and how greed like makes the world go round or something. But fantastic cook, fantastic at like predicting things, fantastic at anticipating needs of guests. All this stuff is kind of their mojo. So they got to look for him. But if you remember, we're out of the stone-destroying powder or juice. But the navigator rightly identifies that the news lady has some, because she's been there the whole time directing who they should unpetrify so they can get the maximum amount of work from the individuals. And so she definitely snuck some away just for like a rainy day. And so she did, but she wants something in return. And propagandist figures it out, and Senku's like, oh, fuck, all right, yeah, that's fine. So she leads them back to the island where, the navigator leads them back to the island where he was, because that's where Francois is, and they unstone them. And then we get some conversation about how it does, like the navigator never cared about the gender or any of that kind of stuff about the butler, because they are so good at what they do that it's like, fuck it. Anyway, so when they come unpetrified, they immediately get dressed and they start marching back to where the navigator's at. And propagandist is like, oh shit. So he follows, and for 2 days straight they walk. He's like exhausted. As soon as the butler gets there, he's like, tell me everything that needs to happen. And Senku fills them in, and then I'm just gonna call her because it looks like a woman. So fills her in, and then she makes the most delicious bread any of them have ever had. Like, it's like delicious, fresh bakery in modern time kind of bread, and everyone's like gobstocked. And it's also made in such a way that it will last like 10 months on a ship without any like need of preservatives or anything else. Just using like the salt, and the fact that bread can really last forever if you just make it not like in a retarded way. So all that store-bought bread that like goes bad, it's because they do that on purpose, literally. So fuck them. Anyway, so that's great. That's fun times had by all. And so at that point, we have to turn back to the news lady, who's like, all right, we got your bread. Now I want what I want. And so the old man crafter guy gets summoned, and it's going to be a while. So he's like, hey, can you just hop on Muscles, and he'll carry you back over to the village, because they're out at the work site, I guess. And he's like, no, I've been bored over here doing nothing, so I crafted something. So the news lady and him come rolling up in a steam-powered car, and he's wearing his suit, and he looks fly as fuck. And then Senko explains what he needs as they start crafting it. Then we get a whole talk about how to make like a mirror using like silver ammoninate to make a backing that's reflective over glass so that it stays protected, and then building a thing behind it. Everyone's like, oh, so we made mirrors. That's all she wanted. And she's like, no, that's not what I wanted. And if you know anything about any kind of science or old-timey history or photography, yep, that's where we're going. You realize that they're making a camera. So he does. He makes a camera, and she like loses her mind about it because she's so happy. And we get like her whole backstory in like montage form, where like she got a camera as a little girl, and she was taking pictures, and eventually she became like the best news lady of all time or whatever. Right, she's so excited. And she's like, I will document everything, and we can put it in a museum that we're going to craft here in this land to commemorate the return of civilization, and yada, 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 yada. And also at some point, the butler's talking to the navigator, and she's like, ooh, we need him around because he's going to do a lot of good stuff for us. And navigator's like, yes, I 100% agree. So after she gets the camera and she gives this whole sad like backstory, and it's all emotional and stuff, Senku just walks up with like 10 more cameras. So like, all right, so we're gonna take these up in the hot air balloon and start taking pictures of shit. And she's like, bah! And then probably Candace is like, oh, you totally ruined her whole backstory thing. But that's what they do. So she starts recording things, and before they go up, Senku and Navigator to like record the land to find out where this oil's at, so they can take their voyage finally. She takes a picture of him making like the Albert Einstein like sticking tongue out face photo, which is like, you know, very famous. If you haven't seen it, then I don't know, fair enough, but you see it all the time. So that's pretty delightful. And again, this show continues to be freaking fun and fantastic all around. Episode 3 continues the mad rush of progressing forward through science and through the story. So we get the bread is great, everyone's happy, super delicious, whatnot. Now they discuss that they also need protein and some other things. So how are we going to get that? We need to get a bunch of meat and preserve it a certain way, and then it'd also be nice if we had some other things. So of course the navigator, who's a super rich trillionaire in his like past life, wants truffles and some other shit like that. And everyone's like, propagandist is like, ha ha ha, good luck. And he's like, you don't seem to understand, Francois. And they all turn, and she's like, yes, I think I can do that. And they're like, what? And so they track down, they get the little girl, and we haven't talked about the little girl that much. I can't remember her name, but her whole thing is that she like has like a watermelon on her head because she's blind, and it helps her see, and they built glasses for her and whatnot. Anyway, that's not what's important. The most important thing is she's very in tune with like nature and the woods and plant life and all that stuff. And so she's able to pick out where there's some boars. And so they get the boars. And if you know anything about truffle hunting, we use dogs to find truffles, but they used to use boars. The problem with boars, or pigs generally, is that they love truffles because truffles smell like female boar cooch. And so they want to eat that shit up. That's not a joke at all. But little girl has a dog. So once they get a boar and it finds some truffles, they're able to, and they're using a lot of the photography, flying around trying to find the oil. And they're concerned about getting the oil before winter comes, because when winter comes, the white stalkers will come or whatever. Bullshit. No, the wrong IP. So that the snow will cover the land and they won't be able to get oil, and they'll have to wait another year to like try to track it down again. And they'll lose all this like time. So they'd like to get going, get the fuck out of here before it gets too late. They, the boars find the truffles. She's able to start cooking with the truffles. It's delicious. Everyone's super excited and happy. And then, meanwhile, they're still trying to find the oil, but they're having a hard time. The main character girl, Gorilla Girl, as they call her in the first season, because she's super strong, but also has super good eyesight. She's looking for, while they're looking for truffles, she's trying to help find the truffles. And then she finds like this large spotch of like black in one of the photographs. And they're like, I don't know what that is. That's probably not truffles. It's something. And then Senku's like, wait a second, that's oil. We found it. So then they go search, and they're having a real hard time trying to figure out where the oil is, because they just have like a bunch of pictures from like the sky, and it's not super clear, but it's like maybe in that area somewhat. And in my head, I was like, were they just taking pictures and putting them like in a stack and being like, there, I found this thing. And it's like, where was that? It exists over there, maybe? I don't know. I'm sure they didn't talk about it, but I'm sure their cartographing was much more complicated than like the show, which moves at like a million miles a second, really had time to like explain. Even though sometimes it really slows the whole production down to explain how science works, I guess. So they're out there, they can't find it, and then Senku's getting upset, and he's like, I gotta use my intelligence, I gotta stop fucking around with this like wandering around bullshit. And he's like, think, and he's thinking about the boars and all this stuff, and he's like, wait a second, I got it, we gotta use the boars. And they're like, how are you gonna use boars to find oil? And he says, he's like, that's how they found the oil the first time. We all know that. And Propagandist is like, you're the only one who could possibly know that. And then he tells a story about how when they found the Senkoku oil fields in the first place, it was because they found a board. It stunk of oil. And they're like, oh, what the hell's this? And so they followed it. And then they found it was like, wallowing in its own muck. But the muck was oil. So then they race back to where they're going to start cooking up the boars to make the meat, like the beef jerky and stuff. And Francois like, oh, Lord, this one smells like oil. And Senku's like, no, stop! So they save the boar, and then they get the boar to go wallow in its own muck, and they find the oil, and they got it, yes! And so the Senku, like, refines the oil somehow, and then he's able to make gasoline, and then he builds a motorboat, and then they take the motorboat out onto sea, and they're like, wow, this is awesome. And the navigator's like, aha, I'm going to use my sextant to navigate us to the New World, to South America. And Senku is like, hell no, we're not going to do that. We're going to build a GPS system. And they're like, Nani? The fuck, you going to put satellites in the sky? And he's like, no, we just need a large transponder on land. They're going to power it with like a waterfall back. And they build this huge thing, and it sends out this huge signal. And then they're able to communicate all the way with the cell phones all the way over to like the middle of the water, not like the very center of the ocean, but like when they kind of took the motorboat out. And from that, they're going to be able to like triangulate exactly where they're at because of the way the radio waves go and stuff. And they have the ear guy. He's holding up like a transponder to like bounce back to kind of like coordinate. And then the priestess lady, who's the older sister of Gorilla Girl, is about to like confess her love to Assistant, because that's a whole plot line we haven't just really discussed since like season 1. But then their signal gets interrupted, and someone's like, and then the Propagandist is like, oh, the cliche static. And then ear boy's like, that's not static, that's like an intentional sound. And so they're all listening to it, and then someone mentions, hey, it seems like it's got a pattern. And the Propagandist, I think it's Propagandist, or Senku is like, that's Morse code. And then Propagandist figures it out, and it's Y, W-H-Y. And then they'll get super scared, and it's got some scary imagery of like a monster. And then Senku's like, there it is. That's that's probably the person who set the stone ray out to destroy everybody. And now they're reaching out because we're gonna go figure the fuck out what's going on and find out who they are. And he's got like a real scary look, and that's when the episode ends. In episode 4, we start off focusing on the voice and how we're gonna figure out where the voice is at. And the smart guys get identified as generals of the team, and they get trying to figure out what's going on. Well, the rest of the team is... Oh, that got quiet. I found this thing again. The little cover business. Anyway, just making sure it's actually recording. Okay. So, Senku and the crew, they're like, think. Someone says something, and Senku's like, that's it. I know what we're going to do. So then he walks us through the process of inventing sonar, and which involves like using fluorescent paint and pushing electrodes through it and something, which is super fun as usual at this show. And so they build that, and then they take it out on the ship, and they are able to use it not only to track because sonar tracks like objects generally, so they're going to use it not just to track where this person's at, so it'll help them like figure out where they need to go, which will be better than just kind of meandering to South America and randomly figuring it out. But it will also help them as they're out there to find fish, because sonar detects bodies in the water. So when they reflect off the sound waves, yada yada, bullshit, it's going to be like, hey, look, now we can fish while we're out, and that's going to make life a whole lot easier. So they're not just eating bread on their trip, which will be great. So they catch a bunch of fish, they take it back. Francois, that's the name, cooks it all up, and everyone's having a great feast. And then they're talking about like, well, how are we going to power this? How are we going to do that? And he's like, we're going to need a lot more batteries. And he's like, we're not going to use batteries. We're going to have these like ridiculous, we're going to have like a nuclear generator. I'm sure we're getting to that point. We're going to have these huge engines. And how are we going to build them? He's like, no, they're going to be super big. We need manufacturing. So now it's time to invent manufacturing. But the problem with manufacturing is you need goods, and they don't have goods because they don't have enough iron. So then Chrome, who is assistant guy, he is like, hey, hold on, let me think. So we can use radar to find stuff underwater, but we can use it to find stuff on land too. And he's thinking about the time they found iron the first time, and they used like electricity and all this kind of bullshit. And he's like, wait a second, I know. So he messes around, and he uses a coil to detect, and using the radar to detect the signature for iron. And then he runs back to the mountain where he first got iron, and he wanders around there, and he finally finds like a huge deposit of iron. He's like, hurrah! So then they come and they invent mining. So they're mining all this iron out, and they're carrying it out, and people are getting like tired as shit because iron is heavy as fuck. And so they're like, oh man, I don't know what we're gonna do. And then Senku's like, time to make a distribution network. So then they use the byproduct from all the oil they're refining, mixed together with gravel to create roads. And if you remember, they have that like gorilla car, and then they got ships. And because, Japan's like a thin island, it's easy to like transport stuff around using ships because you can get just about anywhere real fast. So they build roads from the mine to the shipyard, and the shipyard will take them directly to the base of operations, which is where they're building the big ship, I'm assuming. And everyone's super juiced up about that. Let's see. Oh, and then Pirate Captain King identifies that he's a great leader, not just because, and Senku's a great leader, not because they're smart or because they're any of that stuff. It's because they understand the people and they give the people what they want so that they can enjoy life as well, and that like inspires them to do better and to help themselves essentially. And then we get a shot of them creating mine carts in like literal fucking Minecraft. They have mine carts in the Iron Man mine so that they can get all that iron out real quick. And dun dun dun, we did it! Yay! The boat building process runs into a little bit of a dilemma. That being, no one knows how to make ships. Well, that's not true. What's-his-face knows how to make ships. Or at least he knows how to make models of ships. The Navigator Pirate King guy. So they're having a lot of problems, and then Senku's like, well, we'll just have to make a smaller boat and take a smaller crew because that's all we can really do. But then we get like a flashback from the Pirate King about his life and about how he kept getting told things were impossible, and he kept being like, fuck you, I'm going to do it anyway. Which includes, like, at some point his allowance came down to like 1,000,000 yen, which is still like a lot of money. But then he was able to invest it and make a lot of money, and then there was like he has a bunch of little stories about that, and then his favorite thing of all was to make like real life replicas, or not replicas, like legit models of working ships. And so because he's so skilled at it, he still has that capability, and he was doing that up until the time he was turned to stone. So if he builds a replica, or he builds like a little model that works perfectly and exactly how it should be, and then they take that and they have these devices that let you draw or copy things at a smaller scale, and then they are reproduced in a larger scale, and they talk about how that's how like the Nazca lines were created, which is probably true. And so they're finally able to put their ship together, and they build the engine. We don't get a lot of talk on that. We just get told that it's happening. And then we get some other stuff too. Like they go catch like silk caterpillars so they can make silk bathing suits and for the sails, I think, as well. And then what else are they doing all this time? So they're building the engine, they're building the ship, the silk stuff. Yeah. Okay, so all that stuff gets done, and they finally get their giant ship done, and then the Pirate King's like, he has a list of people that are going to go with him, and it's like pretty much the main crew. Like some of the kind of like side main crew aren't coming. Like the little kid with the watermelon head isn't invited, but she might still along. And like the priestess and the journalist, and a lot of these people are not coming. And then, I'm sure there's some like brute force guys. Like there's a whole cadre of like people they resurrected who are just big strong dudes who were in the enemy's army before during the Stone Wars, but that are now like everyone's like friends forever, except for like two guys who are in prison, which I have not been brought up at this point. They're the guys who tried to kill the one dude, the caveman guy, and they are in like a prison cell, and we haven't really dealt with them at all. But Gorilla Lady has like an issue where she's like, we're taking like the strongest warriors, and like I have concerns because if those guys break out, there's like no one's gonna be able to like stop them from taking over the village. And then Senku's like, oh, that's okay, we're bringing them with us. So you for a fact that they're gonna have like they're either gonna join the enemy and be a problem, or they're gonna have a change of heart and join the Kingdom of Science because the enemy of my enemy is my friend or something. So that's definitely going to be an important aspect later. So that's good. One of them's like a ninja guy, and then the other guy's, I'm trying to remember, he's just kind of like an asshole, if I remember correctly. It's like the police guy. No, the police guy ended up being good. I think that's the guy with like the stone on his face that's kind of dumb in this era. Anyway, I don't remember exactly. It's been a while since I watched Stone Wars. But we get the ship up, we get the crew, everyone, we get all the main characters are called, and they're on board, and they're getting everything set up. And then as the Pirate King's like, hey, if you don't want to come, don't come. I'd rather not force you to come and cause problems down the road than have you come. And so the one guy, the coward guy, which we haven't really talked about that much. So when Senku first comes and finds the village, there's 2 guards that guard like the bridge over to the village. There's guy who needs glasses, and then there's Coward. And so they're kind of like side main characters this whole time. They're like around. There's a whole thing where Gorilla Girl like fights glasses guy, or no, the glasses guy fights like the original bad guy from the first season, who's now a friend, of course, because it's a shonen anime. And he has to get the glasses to be able to beat him, because he can't beat him otherwise. But he's just as strong, if not stronger. And we bring a pretty girl from the past, and we bring her boyfriend, big, like, strong muscles. So, like, everybody's pretty much coming, all the important people, and that includes propagandists and such. Anyway, so Coward is like, no, I don't want to go, and so they all leave, and he's like the only guy standing around. And then he's like, he has this like scheme where even though he's a coward, he's gonna pretend not to be a coward. So he's gonna like jump, and he is going to jump into the water and swim to the boat, but he knows for a fact he can't make it to the boat. So he's not concerned, because he's going to like get as far as he can, and they're going to be like, oh, you tried your best and you have a change of heart and we respect you. And now he's going to be like the king of the village because he's so brave. But then Senku like notices, he has like a gut feeling. So he has the radar turn around and they sense him there. And so Muscles swims out to get him and swims him back, because Muscles is like unlimited stamina and strength. And so he's like, and then everyone's like, you did it. You came, you had a change of heart. We're so happy. And Coward's like very upset because this was not the plan. And so he's like crying while they're all dancing around, shouting, cheering his name. It's pretty funny. Lastly, they're like, all right, time to go to South America to find the source of the thing. And then Senku's like, no, first we're going to Treasure Island, the place where my father and the astronauts landed first, so we can get some stuff out of the spaceship. So we're headed there first. Dun, dun, dun. Now the sea journey has begun. Well, it already begun, but now it commences. So they're going to Treasure Island. Why are they going to Treasure Island? Senku reveals to everybody that there's a treasure box there, and the treasure box is something that his dad put together that contains a bunch of minerals and rocks and stones and precious metals and whatnot. But the biggest thing is platinum, because somehow they're going to use the platinum to get more nitrous oxide or nitrogen. I think it's nitrous oxide, to so they can create more revival fluid. And then he passively mentions that there was another way they could have made revival fluid, but that it would take like a whole year and they'd get just like a little bit. And then Gorilla Girl's like, hey, why don't we just do that? Like, we could have revived a bunch more people. And that's when we learn about the Debian effect from Propagandist. Not Debian. Debian's a Linux thing I was looking at. It's some sort of D-name effect. I can't remember. Anyway, the core concept is that groups of people can only exist in like a harmonious state where everyone kind of knows everybody else, in groups of like up to like 150 people. And so then they have a conversation about, so the people that were living there were about 40 people, and then the people they've revived is about 100 people. So now there's 140. So if they could really only revive about 10 more people before you'd have a split, before people like, who are you? Like, I don't really know who that you are, because it's like too much for like an individual to like really kind of fathom, like have like any remembrance, just because like how the brain works generally. And without like a strong central leadership and like whatever, you start having like factions forming, different groups of people and whatnot. So they purposely did not revive people at this point, because they would be reviving like onesies or twosies, and eventually they'd hit like that mark, and then it would cause like another split, because people just don't know each other, and that would cause confusion and whatever, and they're like fledgling societies. So that's why they haven't done it. But then, while they're talking about the treasure island and everything like that, we see this mysterious fellow like standing nearby, and he wanders off. Propagandist brings him back to Senku and is like, hey, this guy's got to tell you something. And the guy's like, oh, I don't know who you are. And then someone's like, is that No Name? And so his name, they've been calling him No Name, which is kind of fucked up. But that's not his name. His name is like Saki or Suseki, doesn't matter. And we find out that he's not a native to the people of the island, that he was found as a baby and adopted, and that he's from this treasure island, and that there's like the thing on his shield is kind of like a rocket ship going off into space or something. And so he can help them find the treasure once they get to the island, because that's like his people and where he's from. And then they have a conversation about like, oh, so if he's here, there's probably people living there, which makes sense, because if it doesn't make sense to you, they explain. Don't worry. The show explains to you why it makes sense. It makes sense because they probably sent a lot of people out because their whole goal was to like get back to Japan because they were pretty close anyway. So they'd have more land mass, be able to do more stuff. Japan's like a huge island and not just like a tiny little island, which is where the spacecraft landed. So they probably sent out like multiple crews, and then the people who ended up in Japan that survived, they had like the 100 tails or whatever. And we also see that like before they left on this trip, Senku went and had the priestess lady give him like all 100 tails, which a lot of the 100 tails are just like gold shines like this and it's good for this. Like it's just like instructions to be passed down so that like there'd be some scientific knowledge. But after like 3,000 years, it's just like the 100 tales of like the stories from the ancestors or whatever bullshit. So Senku's listening to all this stuff, and that's why he figures out they have platinum and all this stuff in like the treasure box because they brought it up, and his dad's like crafty as he is. Okay. So we get that story. Okay. So then there must be people who live in this island, obviously, because they weren't going to just like everybody going to go and like chance like finding Japan or just all dying and that's the end of civilization. They would have split and been like, all right, some of us will stay here, some of us will go, and then like if we make it, we make it. If not, we can send out more forays or kind of do whatever. And so there's probably going to be people there when they get there, and this guy existing proves it. So that's great news. Then we get hot chick, the crafter lady, to talk about the ship's so impressive. It'd be it's something, and then like the boat people, which are like Senku, the old man, and the navigator, are like, ooh, let us show you the boat. And then the gorilla girl and then the wrestler girl are like, oh, you're gonna regret this. And she's like, no, I love science. And then we see that she always loved like the reason her and Senku are like BFFs is because she loves all the science shit, even though she doesn't quite understand it. So she gets like a tour of the boat and all this stuff, and at some point the navigator and Muscles and Hot Girl are all standing around in like the cabin, and he's explaining the ship shit to them, and they're talking about they have a laboratory, and then a bunch of people get seasick, so Senko uses his like mobile laboratory to create like a solution from like a poisonous plant so that their tummies feel better by separating like the oil and the water soluble material. Anyway, I'm not a science guy, I don't really fucking know what's going on with all that, but it's interesting. After that, there's a storm, and everyone's freaking out except the navigator, who's just drinking like green tea with like beautiful goat's milk shapes in his made by Francois. And he's like, calm the fuck down, we'll be fine. And then Seko wrecks in, and he's like, we got everybody on, all hands on deck. This is the perfect opportunity to sneak up on these people and see if we can get some information on them, see if they're friends or foes. Because someone at some point brought up a concern that like the mysterious voice is actually from Treasure Island, and so that they might have to like fight again. So then everyone gets ready, and it's like dun dun dun. They're rolling up, and they see the island, and No Name's like crying, and everyone's like, yeah. Episode 7 picks up right where we left off with episode 6, where they're coming in hot. They're checking everything. They're trying to sneak in under the barrier of the storm. And then the storm starts to lift. And so Navigator's like, all right, everybody, let's go. And so they're able to like hide the ship in a cove, or so they think. Also, the little girl, I was right. The melon-headed chick, she stowed away on the ship. So they catch her because she pops out when they're like, oh, we need to send like a scouting party in to make sure everything's good to go. And they end up sending Senku, No Name, Gorilla Girl, and Propagandists to go kind of like investigate, find some natives, and kind of like figure out what's going on. So they head off to do that. They send Gorilla Girl because she's tough and she has great vision. Propagandist, obviously, because he's a propagandist. Senku because science shit. And then I think his name's like Senso, the No Name guy, because he has the he's from this area, so that just kind of makes sense. After that, we head back to the ship, and the radar guy gets like very concerned, the bow and archer guy who can hear really well, because he's seeing some like crazy stuff. So he asks somebody who's like swabbing the deck to go down and check it out. And so when the guy goes down, the coward, essentially, he dives down. He's a really good swimmer, apparently. So he dives down and he sees all these like stone bodies, and he comes up and he's like, hey, there's a whole bunch of people who've been turned to stone. But wasn't this island like deserted before the stone petrification thing? And the navigator's like, hold up, we're being watched. Uh-oh, ruh-roh. And then they get slammed. And then we go back to Propagandists and Senso and those guys. And no name Senso. What's called Senso? Senso is looking back at the ship because they thought they saw a light. And he's like, oh, and then Propagandist picks up like the little telescope and he's like, damn. So then they go and hunt down Senku and Gorilla Girl, who are like running through the forest looking for clues on how to find somebody. And they're like, everybody got turned to stone. And then Gorilla Girl tries to run back to save them. And Propagandist like has already like tied a rope around her ankle and so stops her immediately. And so they have a conversation about this and like, hey, if we just run back, they're probably going to get turned to stone too, and we're not going to help anybody. So we just got to get the platinum, and then we can make unstone everybody and do that. And then they have like a crime scene investigation with Propagandist using his like mentalist powers, and then Senko using like his forensic science powers. And they're able to figure out there's like a young woman who traveled this way, and that she's something. And then Gorilla Girl hops up in the trees and finds her. And as soon as they find her, like all the native people, which include No Name, are like madly in love with this woman because she's so beautiful, while Senku, Propagandist, and Gorilla Girl kind of just like, meh. Yeah, she's fine. And we know this because she immediately gets propositioned by like 3 guys who are asking her to marry her when they're like watching from the woods. And then the whole time after they see her and they start following her, No Name's like got hearts over his head and he's madly in love. And so then there's a whole like weird thing about she is going to become the master's bride, and so she can't be with anybody. And then she's like, Senku like runs out and is like, hey, we need the treasure so that we can do stuff. And she's like, oh, are you the master? And then Gorilla Girl's like, well, he's kind of our master. And then she like propositions him, and he's just like, I don't care. I don't give a fuck about my libido. And then she tries to proposition No Name, and he just passes out. Anyway, they hear some noise, and she runs because it's like her village, and there's like a conflict in the village with like the king's guards, the master's guards, it seems like, and then the village people. There's like a riot about her being taken away to be the bride of the master, and people are talking about how they're going to turn them to stone if they don't, because that's what the master does, because he's an asshole. And then Senko uses tear gas that he like created to he's carrying around all this shit too, like in a backpack. He had like a microscope. They have a telescope. It's all pretty funny. Anyway, so they tear gas everybody, and then to stop the rioting, and then the girl's like tells them that like she hates this master and how he's so wicked, and so ever since she was a young girl, she did everything she could to be the most beautiful girl on the whole island so that she could get in and like overthrow him from the inside. And then she wants to team up, and Senku of course is like, yeah boy. At this point in episode 8 of season 3 of Dr. Stone is where we start off with the backstory of the pretty girl in the village and why she hates the master so much, and we learn more about the characters in general. So when she, like 5 years ago, when she was underage, she and her, it seemed like sister and some of their friends went for like a little boat ride, which is for a boat in the kingdom of whatever this place is called. And so they were chased by the 2 greatest warriors, this woman and this pervy guy who all he does is admire the beauties on the ship and says it's too bad they have to take care of them because, especially her, she's going to grow up to be a real beauty someday. So the woman has this rope with something on it, and she's spinning it, about to toss it, and he's like, hey, move it up a little bit more. So she does, and then when she tosses it up, it casts that green light that turns people into stone. And so, ruh-roh, they all get turned to stone, but obviously the pretty girl doesn't. What happens is part of her hair gets caught up in the light, or like the explosion or whatever it is, and starts to turn to stone, but then she like cuts it off. It looked like she just tore it off, but I don't know. Anyway, so she cut it. That doesn't make sense. So she cut off her hair, and then the light kind of like had an endpoint, and so when it got to the endpoint, it stopped. And because it stopped, she was knocked out of the boat, but she was safe. So they didn't chase her anymore because they thought she was turned to stone like the rest of them, and they just let them fall into the water. At that point, we come back to the present, and they're trying to figure out what to do. And they're like, okay, so they're going to come tomorrow, and they're obviously going to pick her to go to the master. And when she gets there, she's going to figure out where this weapon's at, so that she can get it and use it against them, which Senku's like all about that, right? And he's like, this is great information, because it's one of those things where like, if this was like magic or something, there's really nothing to be done. But since it's science-based, then there's definitely something that can be done, and I can kind of figure out a solution to this problem, or, I can figure it out. So that's the plan. But it'd be nice if she could go in with somebody else who's actually like a fighter and can do stuff. And so obviously everyone looks at Gorilla Girl, and she's like, I'll do it. And they're all like, ooh, boy, you're not pretty or graceful or anything, bro. which, she's hot, but it's an anime character. So, but she's so boorish and like manly that they're kind of like, I don't know about that. So then they're like, well, we got no other choice. So then they give her a dress and they do all this stuff to kind of like make her up. They're like, okay, time for a makeover. And then Propagandist is going to like teach her the ways of womanhood or something. And so they start doing that. But then to really get like everything they need, Senku's like, I need my lab, so we got to go check it out. So when they head over there, they see that the boat is full of like these guards from this island, and like we see the second in charge command of this whole operation, and it's like an older, tall guy with a bunch of like weird looking stuff, and he's kind of creepy. And he's searching through the boat, and he's like, "Oh, look at this! Oh, look at this!" And then the woman warrior's there, and she's like, "We found this stuff, but I have no idea how it's used, and maybe we should just throw it overboard." And he's like, "No, we'll take it to the master. We'll figure it out." At this point, they're like, "Oh, we can get these clothes off and use them to make prettier clothes for like the women or whatever for the master." And they're like, "How are we gonna get these clothes off?" And he's like, "Well, just break the statues and take them off." And so he pushes over like assistant. And remember, breaking the statues is really not that big of a deal because they can just like glue them back together and then bring them back, which we've established previously. Anyway, but Gorilla Girl gets super mad, and so she runs down, and then she gets confronted by the warrior lady, and they fight, but Gorilla Girl's at a major disadvantage because this dress is like really constricting, so she can't do much. She can't kick or really fight back, and so she's just defending against the attacks. And at some point, she's like, I got to make a move so I can win this battle. And so she screams, we need the lab, like as loud as she can, and so everyone stops. Like the battle stops between the two of them, and like the people in the boat are like, the fuck? And then Propagandist is like, oh, fuck. And Senku's like, oh, my God. And then Propagandist is like, I got an idea. So he runs down. He's like, oh, hey, it's so-and-so. Here's Lab, your boyfriend. Sorry, we didn't mean to come down here. Like, she gets really pissed off when, like, she can't find her boyfriend and she kind of loses it, blah, 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 blah. And then Gorilla Girl's like, yeah, for sure. Then she kisses Senku, and Senku's like, ugh. and then the warrior woman's like, oh, my gosh, don't show me that. Get out of here. Just leave, just go. And they're like, okay, bye. And so then they leave. And then the Gorilla Girls, or someone's like, oh, well, if someone is still around, they'll have like heard you, so that we can like get them for help. And then we get like hours ago or whatever, and we see like more of like when they were attacked. Navigator like saw the woman, is like, what are you doing? Oh, she's using a weapon. Listening guy uses his bow magic to like knock the thing higher, and then Navigator kicks the little girl, like I mentioned before, she was not turned to stone, kicks her away enough where she's not affected at all. Also, I can't remember his name, Coward, is in the water, and so he sees it, and he's like, shit! And so he swims deep, and right before it's about to get him, the range like ends. And so he survives, so we get 2 survivors. So he comes back up, he climbs on the boat, and he's looking around, and then he sees the guards, so he hides in a barrel. And then like back to the present, he's like, he sees, who does he see? He sees a Gorilla Girl, or hears her, and then he sees her, so he hops out when all the guards are off the deck and starts yelling. He's like, hey, I'm here. And then Gorilla Girl's like, oh, I see somebody. It looks like we have an inside advantage, and they see it's him, and they're like, bro. And then they compare the whole thing to like gacha games. Where like he's like a regular R type character. And then it's too bad that it wasn't somebody like Navigator or Francois, who would be like a super rare type character. And they're all kind of like, oh my gosh, all right, well, at least he can do something. And then he's like, help me. And Seku's like, oh my gosh, he's supposed to be helping us. This is ridiculous. Like he's more of a burden than a help. And then the guards come up, and he like jumps under the barrel. And then the second leader is like very observant. So he's like, oops. This barrel moved. I'm going to lift the barrel up and see what's going on. And right before he does, so he's going to find, I think it's Shinkaro or something like that, the Coward. They hear a glass break, and they're like, what? And so they all run off to see what's going on there, and they find the greenhouse, and they find the goats, and all that good stuff. And then we go back to Senku, and it's like, oh, someone, did a really good favor helping him out, Coward, get out of this situation. And they're like, oh, and then also, like, the motorboat. They hit the motorboat. I know exactly who's over there and who also got saved. And they're like, it's a super regular or super SSR type gotcha in the little girl, because she's so good at spying and moving around and staying secretive and taking care of things. And they're like, yes, we got it. And then we see her like her card pool for like the gotcha game. So Heidi Girl and Coward are able to successfully get the lab, get it covered to make it look kind of like a beast or like fauna or flora, and then get it out of there. There's a moment where Kurhaku, who's the Coward, he almost loses his ability to be successful, But again, he like his luck skill is very high apparently because he's able to figure it out, right? And part of it is his best friend, the glasses guy, who is like in the stone. He's like, I feel the presence of my friend, the coward, and I know he's going to do the right thing, and I'm just going to feel it very strongly, and hopefully he'll get it. And then the coward outside, he sees Stealth Girl bouncing around, leading these guards like around the boat, and he's like, I got to do the right thing. So he goes and gets the lab, and he drives it out, and they're able to successfully meet up with Senku and whatnot, which is great. So now they have the lab, but they're being tracked, right? So Senku creates, he combines like jasmine with like rotten meat or something, which creates like a poo smell, and then he throws some sulfur in there, and then Propagandist makes like poop sounds, like farting sounds or whatever. And so the guys who are like looking for the beast are like, oh, get out of here. They run off, and then they're able to drive and get sneaky. And then the pretty girl who's from the island, she shows them this like secret cove. So this lab can go on the ground and on the water. It's got big wheels, and the wheels like float. And while they're doing that, they make like separate tracks go in different directions as well, so that they can't really be followed. So then they're hanging out in the grotto. Meanwhile, the second in command guy is like really pissed off that they lost this thing, and he was like wants to figure out what's going on with it because it's like another beast. Like they never saw the goats before, so it's not wholly unbelievable that they would just be like, I don't know what the fuck's going on. So he sends people to like search everywhere. Meanwhile, the crew is trying to figure out how to make Gorilla Girl beautiful. So Senku makes shampoo, and they use it on her hair, and her hair is still wild. And he talks about, oh, hey, it's because like the hair is wrapped around itself. It's like dreaded essentially. And so we got to like really condition it down. So he makes some conditioner, and they finally get her hair to be like soft and to like hang loose around her head. And then he creates a bunch of makeup, and then Gorilla Girl's like, I can put it on, and she puts it on, and everyone's like, oh, it's like she looks like the Joker, like she looks hideous. And so they wash it all off, and then Pretty Girl uses her like feminine information to like use the makeup to make her look beautiful, and then she looks super beautiful. And then they're talking about, we should probably have one more person just in case, so we can have 3, right? But it's all boys. So then they dress up and make up all the boys, and Senku looks ridiculous. Propagandist looks okay. I can't remember the problem with him. Something about something, I don't remember. Anyway, they try No Name, and then the little girl they can't do because she's a little girl, and so then they do the coward, and the coward passes because he's already kind of like feminine. Poor guy. Okay, so then they dress him up and do makeup. So the next day, the warrior from like the flashback, along with the second in command, they come to like pick the women that are going to go and be the boss's like harem or whatever. And so beautiful girl obviously gets picked, and then Gorilla Girl, she is gonna get, the guy's trying to decide if he wants to choose her or not, and then he goes to like touch her boobs or whatever, and then she like reaches up to grab his hand to like fight him or whatever, because she's like not gonna have any of that shit. But then the warrior guy like breaks it up because he notices what's gonna happen, and he's like very intrigued because he wants to like break this chick in because she's hot and he's a pervert or whatever. And then the guy's like, oh, okay, you pass. And then they get to the last person, which is the coward. And he tries very hard to not be attractive. He's like, oh, I'm just a gal who likes to run around and I do stuff. There's no reason the boss would want to be with me. And then he passes because of the like tomboy fetish or whatever. Good stuff. And he's like, no. And so all 3 of them made it. And that makes Senku very happy because now he can execute on his plan to figure out the stone stuff and get going with all that. So the ladies are all in now, and they're out practicing being ladies. That includes the coward, the pretty one, and Gorilla Girl, and they're hanging out back with the science team, which is No Name, Senku, Propagandist, and the girl, the stealth girl. He starts talking about how they got to figure out how to get this weapon, and the first thing they identify is that whenever they've seen it being used, it's being thrown. So the only way to get it from the best way to get it from the warrior lady is to have her use it and then knock it out of the sky and then grab it. And so to do that, they need a drone. So they're going to start making drones. And they're going to do that by creating engines. And to create engines, they're going to use electromagnetic power. So they're going to take some iron they have in the laboratory and wrap copper wire around it, which they've been harvesting for years now at the previous island. On top of that, they make like an earpiece for Gorilla Girl. That looks like jewelry. So Senku makes that. They toss it to her. She gets it. Now they can like relay orders. Once they have the generators up, they make these little like rat-looking car things. Like so they have the big car with like the gorilla on the front. So now they made like a bunch of little like robotic cars that they can like remote control cars that they use. And then obviously all the inhabitants here are like, oh, it's a rat. And so they send that to Gorilla Girl, and they tell her that like, hey, send us a letter if you need anything. But of course, none of the three girls know, or the girls and the coward have no idea what letters are. And then at one point, the coward guy's like, oh, I do know what a letter is. And he recalls this story where his friend, the glasses guy, is like studying letters and learning how to write. And then he sits down to learn how to write too. But the pretty good lady's like, oh, I'm so impressed. That's so great. And he's like, yeah. And then she's like, all right, let's write a letter. And then he's like, and Girl's like, yeah, you fell for it. He always lies about these stories. Like, that's not the true ending. In reality, he just like ran off. So then she tries to construct some sort of letter with like the blood on her hand. And then she sends it back. And when they get it, they're like, I don't know what this is. So they have to, the propagandists and Senku have to like really think hard about like what all these like pictograph essentially, and try to understand what she was thinking when she was writing all this stuff. And eventually they kind of figure out that she was using the first two letters, or like the sounds from each of these different like pictures she had on there to represent what he was trying to say, which is that platinum is here. Which there's some complications with that. Like, how would she know how to spell any of that stuff, or like what any of that would mean, or like as part of it's like it's literally like Japanese, and then they get like an English translation on top. So at the same time, it's like the localization and translation and stuff. I have a lot of questions about how this like got translated over and how they figured it out. But whatever. The point is, she found the treasure chest. And she goes down to like crack it open, and it's covered in stone, right? Which is the same way that the recorder was covered in stone when they found it. So she's like, oh, that's right. And she's like, I could break it apart, but it'd make a ton of noise. So to solve that problem, Senku creates plaster that you can insert inside the stone, and it'll like naturally like expand and break the whole thing apart. And so they send her some of that, and then there's like guards that roam around here, and there's like a big strong guard. It's really not that important, but the pretty girl and the coward have to like distract them several times, and for like humorous effects, right? So while they're distracting, Gorilla Girl's able to like drill into the stone, put the stuff in there, and then she comes back later in the evening and it cracks open. So she's pulling stuff out, and she finds this case. And she broke it, right? This bottle, but she's able to like gather it all up, put it in a sack, and then transport it back to Senku. And when Senku gets it, he's like, "All right, let's check this out." And he finds platinum. It's like mostly gold that his father, or his guardian, they have a whole conversation about that again. But anyway, so his father is able to like gather up all the gold dust from the river for like decades and decades and decades. And as part of that, he got a bunch of platinum. And there's a whole conversation about how platinum is so rare and how it takes forever to find any. And that, it's like really useful for stuff, but at the same time, it's such like a rare mineral. And then he doesn't just find like one little bit, he finds like a whole bunch of it. And then we could start going back and forth at this point between Senku and his dad. And it's like Senku's like counting. And while he's counting, his dad's like going in the river trying to get this gold dust and platinum, because he knows that that's what he's supposed to do. And as he's getting older, and like his kids and grandkids are like, hey, you got to stop, man. He's like, no, I refuse. And he literally is pans for gold and platinum until he dies, so that there'll be more resources and minerals and stuff for like the future to like build on. And that's one of the things he talks about, is like the first time civilization got created, there was like an abundance of minerals because it was just like everywhere, right? But now that we've been so much has been tapped out and moved around and all this stuff, it's like there's just not. So that for civilization to like build itself back up and have access to these resources is a lot tougher, because they're not like, they're going to be like in stuff that's running away in like various places or under the ocean. It's not going to necessarily just be in the ground like it was before. So then that's when they have the conversation, propagandist and Senku, about his dad. And he's like, man, your dad was working hard as you are. I guess that's where you get it from. He's like, it's not actually my dad. And they're like, what? He's like, yeah, he always told me that I was his friend's kid. But he raised him like his whole life. I never asked further. So the whole thing's interesting. So I wonder if I'd be very curious to see if we ever get like an answer to that. Like, it's really not like a predominant like storyline, but it's just interesting because it's like, it kind of goes to like the nature versus nurture, which is very much like a more science oriented thing, where it's like you're not born the way you are. You're like, your environment affects who you are, what you do, and like all that crap, which I agree with for the most part. But there are some genetic components to things. Anyway, so they're able to get this platinum. They're able to create a thing and start creating the nitrous, the miracle reviving fluid, as he calls it. So that's all great. And meanwhile, Gorilla Girl didn't go like completely unnoticed. The guards did find the chamber, and they found some of the dust or whatever, and they found some glass because of the glass bottle. And they take it to the number 2, and the number 2 is like very suspicious. And then everyone's kind of like, we have intruders here. We got to find them. It's like dun dun dun. While this is all going on. So, and this halfway through the season. So good stuff. Let's see where the rest of this goes. This whole season is called like the New World. I don't think it almost seems like they're never going to get there. Like, it's half the season if we're still stuck on like this tiny island that's like nearby Japan, near enough where people like ancient people could have just like rowed their fucking ways over to the island. But they do seem like they're in the southern hemisphere at some point here, because I think the dad he makes some comment about it. So I don't know how far they travel to get here, but now they can like revive their team, and we'll see how this goes. It's gonna be another battle, apparently, another shonen battle. The second half of season 3 kind of starts off with a banger, as these shonen anime tend to do. So they got the fluid, and now it's time to revitalize everybody. But the first person they need to revitalize so they can make their drone, so they can intercept the stone thing that the lady throws and all that good stuff, is the craftsman. So they got to get the craftsman. So they go back to the ship, and they see they're taking all the stone bodies, like the enemy, and they're just tossing them in the river, as they do, so they can clear off the ship and have. And they're talking about how that's important, and they're like, I think we're going to need somebody else first, because that's the only person who can help us get like this thing out of the water and figure out where the stuff's getting dumped and all that stuff. And that's the pirate captain. So they're going to find the pirate captain. But the pirate captain, he clearly is in charge. And so the second in command guy, when he's on the ship looking at all the stone bodies, he identifies it as well. He's like, no one dressed like this is not in command, so let's take him back. Because, from the last episode, we remember that we learned that the enemy learned or figured out that there's some sort of spy system going on. And so they're like, we got to like root this out. So it's probably one of these girls. So let's try that first. And so they take pirate captain's stone body back, and they give all the girls like an axe, and they're like, if you're not a spy, you will not mind destroying this guy, but if you don't destroy it, then we're going to kill you. And so the girls, who are all like pretty young women, have no idea how to use an axe and are just completely incompetent. And then Kohaku is about to be like, freak, what am I going to do? And then she gets a message from Senku, and Senku's like, hey, just smash it up real good, but keep it in like sizable chunks, and then you're going to use the mice robots to get them all back, and then we're going to reconstruct them and bring them back to life. And then she's like, all right. So she runs up, and she's like, hiya! And she just like breaks the head off and breaks like big sizable chunks all over the place. And then Coward and Beautiful Girl gather them all up, and then they use the drones to like ship them all back. They put them all together, and they get him like new pirate clothes, and then they bring him back, and he's like, yeah! And the big difference this time around is that before he had like this blue thing, and I can't remember, like people have like scars or cracks in their skin, I think because they were stoned for like so long. But you got to remember too, like part of the stone process is like revitalizing, and so it keeps the stuff inside like it keeps it safe. But the reason people have like cracks or weird marks and stuff like that is something to do with like the time or something. So now that this guy's had revitalization, like stone passage, and now he's coming back, I guess he doesn't have the blue mark anymore. So that's nice. So then they go, and he's so smart, and he's not in Senku's level, but he's super smart and observant. So he immediately realizes like, hey, we need to find a way to knock this thing out of the air using a kite. And Senku's like, wrong, we're gonna build drones. And he's like, what? That's crazy. And it's like, yeah, so first thing we need to do is go get a craftsman. And so he's underwater, and they can't breathe long enough to go find him. So then the next step is Senku makes oxygen tanks, which takes 10 hours of like pumping with this like improvised bike pump situation. To give them like 10 minutes of underwater time. So they build 2 pumps, they pump them up, they get them ready to go, and then No Name and Pirate Captain head down. And Pirate Captain starts to realize that No Name is like incredibly smart, and part of it is like, hey, he remembered like stuff from like when he was a baby. That's pretty impressive. And then he picks out a bunch of stuff and notices things and like intuits a bunch of stuff. So he's actually like a really smart, super smart guy too, which makes sense because he's like a descendant of these people as well. Like he might be like Senku's half brother or whatever. Kind of situation where there's like the dad is not really his dad, but he's also super smart and like an astronaut, so maybe he's a descendant of that guy, and so he inherited some of that like intelligence. If that's how the show's gonna go, I don't know. But they're down there, and they find the craftsman finally, and they use like jellyfish to like send signals, and they have like a cord they're pulling on and stuff. It's all like, it's super exciting and super fun. But then the craftsman's like stuck in the ground because he must have hit real hard and like sunk in a little bit, and so the two of them are not able to pull him up. And so then the pirate pirate captain gets the idea. He's like, oh, we got to get Muscle Man. We got to get the strong man. So they go find him. And they need fluid for that, so then they use like Morse code to like Japanese Morse code. It's so good. So it sounds nerdy as shit, but it's fucking these Japanese Morse code to like transmit a message back so that they send fluid down, and then inside the fluid, once they're down there, he creates like an air bubble with like the oxygen tank so that he can pour the liquid onto Muscle Man to bring him back to life. But before he can do that, No Name grabs the broken arm that the pirate captain almost didn't see and puts it on. And so they bring him back. And the second he comes back, he gets like some oxygen, and he's like, that's all I need. And then he's so like he's such a shonen anime hero that he just looks at the pirate captain, and they have like an eye conversation essentially. They're just like, hey, we're teammates. I know exactly what you want. Just point the way. And you have to say shit. And the pirate captain's like, all right, this guy's awesome. And so then they go, and the three of them are able to pull out the craftsman and take him to the top. And so now we got the craftsman, so now we can build the drone, and then we can rescue everybody else. And things are looking super up for the Kingdom of Science at this point. So everyone's hanging out in the cave while they reconstruct the crafter guy. He's missing like a little poop on the back, like the swirly Japanese poop on his back. But eventually, Muscle Man finds it all, and they bring him back to life. And then they start building their drone, and we get the whole thing with like, oh, we're gonna coat feathers in plastic, and we're gonna do this, we're gonna do that, and build ball bearings and shit like that. And then, hey, we got it. We got a drone, and it's very shaky, but it exists. And it's like, all right, Mach 1, let's do it. All right, so the rest of the episode, we spend time with Kohaku, who's Gorilla Girl, and the Coward and the Beautiful One. Mostly between Kohaku and the Coward guy, because the Coward guy got chosen to go be seen by the Master. And so he's going up there, and he's freaking out and all this stuff. And then he gets up there, and he like opens up the thing, and then the second in command guy comes over, is like, ooh, I have to make sure everything's good before the Master sees his like chosen maiden or whatever. And then we go back to Kohaku, and she's standing there like watching. And then the strong guy from the other team is like, I know you're the traitor, so let's fight. And then she's like, all right, fuck it. And so she gets out like this dagger she's crafted, and she beats the shit out of like the entire army until it's just the two of them. And then they fight. And then they go, they start going back and forth. Meanwhile, back at the top, we learn that Coward was given this like knockout potion in a pineapple from Senku before he left. And so he uses it on the second command, and then opens up the thing for the Master and sees that he's actually turned into stone. He's a statue. And then he looks exactly like No Name. So they must be brothers or something, he conjects or whatever. And then the second in command is like, aha, so you've seen the Master, it's time for you to something. And then Coward's like, nope, see ya. And so he leaps off the thing down, and he sees Kohaku, and he's like, Kohaku, help me. And then right when Kohaku who's kind of like fighting this guy, but clearly not as strong as him, or not able to fight him as well, which she mentions. She's like, oh, I'm not as strong, but something. The second in command guy leaps down and uses his like claw weapon to stab the Coward through the gut, pretty much not killing him instantly, but he's gonna die. And so he falls. Kohaku grabs him and runs off, and he is able to tell Kohaku that all the stuff, like the stone and this and that, and then it looks like the No Name. And then so she runs, and she's got a genius idea, which is to get turned into stone so that he's preserved, right? Because it's the curative factors, which gets brought up in this episode. It's just kind of like a reminder when they're talking to the old man. He's like, oh, I've never felt this better. And it's like, well, yeah, being turned to stone and made you, like, probably cured all your arthritis and everything, which would be great as someone who has a bunch of arthritis. Thank you, U.S. Army. Anyway, so at this point, she runs past Pretty Girl, whispers to her like all the information she needs to give to Senku, and then she makes a big fuss and goes on top of like the Master's tent and is like, everybody, your Master's actually stone, something. And then the second man is like, hey, no one listen to that, everyone cover your ears. And then he turns to like the girl and is like, use it. And so she uses the thing, throws it up, and then right before it goes off and they get turned to stone, Kohaku's like, oh yeah, it definitely is like a science thing. Like it looks like these two like platinum or silver bands twisted together, and they got like chips on them and stuff, like microchips or whatever. And so it's like, huh. So this is clearly like a science device that was crafted. And then her and Coward get turned to stone. And then we see just some like, we get like not a normal ending. We get an ending with like like drawn on scrolls, like on paper, on old paper, shots of like Ohaku and the coward doing stuff like back in the day, I guess, because it's like a very sweet. And then the pretty girl's like, oh my gosh. And that wraps up that episode. So we finally are wrapping up everything they need to fight the Island Kingdom here. First things first, the raids by what's his face are going pretty well. That being said, they when the main big guy who's not like one of the two main fighters, like the girl with the stone or the actual strong guy, whatever his name is, Maj or whatever, I forgot. We get some like looks, like askance looks from the second in command guy, who's actually the first in command. So he's clearly suspecting something or has some thoughts about the matter. That happens a few times, so it's pretty obvious that things are not going to go 100% according to plan, or that he has some suspects. Also, during this episode, they revitalize the wrestler girl, the sheriff guy, and Magnus, who's like the big strong guy who was running the village before Senku showed up, and Gold Spear guy, who's the guy who beat Magnus to like take over the town when Senku got there from season 1. So they bring them back because at some point they're talking about like, okay, so how we're going to capture this stone is the drone's going to fly up, it's going to get entangled with the rope that they use to send it up, and then we're going to have like to pull a tug of war. And they also make some tar rope or carbon wire so it won't snap when everyone's pulling it hard. During this phase though, of all this stuff's going on, Magnus also has like an askance look at some point. So I don't know if there's going to be like some cross, double cross, triple cross situations going on, but there's definitely something going on with Magnus and the second in command, most likely together, but there might be like other things going on as well, or you know, who knows? I feel like there's going to be a lot of like revelations in the next couple episodes. This is episode 15 for those keeping track. So we spent most of this episode dealing with new inventions, bringing people back. They invent a gun so that when they get the stone, what's his name doesn't just steal it from him immediately. And then they bring the sheriff back at this point, even though he's kind of like a rogue element, in that he's kind of like Magnus, where he's kind of like a good guy, bad guy, where he's like not always a good guy, but he's like, you know, sees the light of the way, but like at any opportune moment he may turn on them, because he was a sheriff, so he's the only one who has like experience with using, or he was like a police officer, so he's the only one with experience using a gun, and he's actually able to train up on that. At some point, they have concerns about making too much noise because of the gunshots and everything else going on. And so Pretty Girl goes and like flirts with the guys in her old village and has them practice the drums really loud for like the upcoming drum festival or whatever, the drum circle at the fucking local park, like whatever they're doing. So that's fun. Okay, so the plan is they're going to steal a bunch of black cloaks. They're going to go out there with a bunch of cloaks. Dude Meister's going to lead the whole army out there. They're going to get the stone thrown at him. They're going to use the drone to grab the stone, and then he's going to get the stone and take over or whatever. Right, but their plan is to use the gun to actually get it, so it's like the battle of three forces or three armies or whatever. I'm trying to remember if there's anything else that's specific. Oh, the power of the drone. They have this whole thing where like they're trying to figure out how to like stabilize a drone, and then using like the tops and all this and the fidget spinners and whatever that they're crafting for other things like motors and engines and stuff. The sidekick or the apprentice guy, he's like, I have an idea. We can use that to stabilize this, do this thing. And then Senku's like, wow, that is a wonderful idea, which is why I already did it. Bro. Anywho. So they get a stable drone. They get the rope, slash the wire. At some point, the Golden Spear guy, he was like, he was around in season 2, but he hasn't been around much in this season, to be completely honest. But like, he's finally stepping up to be like the hero that he is always. He's really sad because he thought his friend died, the coward. But they're like, no, he's just stoned up with Gorilla Girl, so we're gonna rescue him eventually. And so he's like crying because he's so relieved that his best friend, who's an idiot but still his best friend, is alive. But he's the best fighter they got left, so he's gonna have to do the grunt's work when it comes to like holding off the whole rest of the opposing army and doing all that stuff. So he has a couple kind of like cool scenes, like very like shonen anime scenes in this episode too. And I was like, oh, that guy's badass. I forgot about that. So it sets up definitely some shenanigans with the second in command. Also shenanigans with Magnus. Who knows where this all ends up? But that's kind of where we're at now. Seeing where all this stuff goes. Cool. So the plan does not go as planned. What occurs is badass guy with the gold spear and glasses, he does his badass thing in that he goes and fights and starts the battle. Then Mash or whatever, the good guy, bad guy, the frenemy, he pretends to get knocked back by some of the weakest of the people in the cloaks. And at that point, he's like, oh no, we got to use our secret trick or whatever, blah, 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 blah. And so the girl at the stone crate and stuff, she goes to swing it up to use it. And then they're like, yes, we got it. We're going to get this thing and we're going to win. And the navigator's like, hold up. something ain't right. My navigating instincts, like my pure instinct or whatever, is like, nah, something ain't right. We're not going to do that. And then Senku at the same time is like, wait a second. And he's like starting to do the math. And he's like, something seems really wrong, but I refuse to go with my instinct because my instinct is science. So he starts doing math real fast, and he calculates that the stone is going to land like close enough to hit everybody, right? Not just the guys in the cloaks, like him and his crew. And so he's like, it's not real. We got to run. So he's like, run. And so they all run to the lab, and the lab starts taking off, and they're all able to like sneak their way back on there. And then Mash is chasing them, but something. And then we get the point of view from the second in command, and all his like side eyeing and stuff. He's like, I have suspects, and he's looking at like the earring that the frenemy has, and so then he goes and has them pull like the statue down of Kuhaku, the gorilla girl, and he notices that she has the same earring, so he takes it off and puts it in, and so he's able to hear all the plans. Or a lot of the plans that are going on, and realizes that there's like a betrayal. Then he gets the stone throwing girl to not to like throw a different stone, and that causes all the problems. All right, so that resolves that. So they're able to escape, and then they notice the ship's moving away, and that they're loading the ship up with everybody on the island because the plan is apparently that the second in command is going to gather everybody on the island. They're going to search everybody to make sure none of them are traitors. And then they're going to stone the entire island, which doesn't make a lot of sense to me because it doesn't have that much range. So unless they have like a different device, it seems kind of like silly. If anything, it's just like, well, and then we'll just abandon the island and go somewhere else. Right? But they don't really know how to use the ship. Like they don't, all the technological stuff and the engine and all that stuff. So they're probably just getting everybody off so they can, I don't know, just go around and throw the stone and get everybody. I don't know. It doesn't seem like it's going to work the way he would think it's going to work. And it's obviously not going to work because Senku and the good guys are going to win. This is a shonen anime after all. But that's the plan, I guess. Okay, so then Magma, he definitely was eyeballing stuff and thinking stuff. So at some point, he switched the gun out with with like a piece of wood that was shaped like the gun. And then he's like sneaking off, and then Propagandist like goes to stop him, and he gets knocked out. And so they're together chasing around, and then Magma's like, I'm gonna shoot him, and he shoots and hits like a boat going out to the big boat because obviously the gun doesn't go that far, and so that's a wash. But then everyone kind of figures out what's going on, and so they get on a boat and they start heading. Propagandist and Magma start heading towards the big ship, and then Senku comes up with a plan. He's like, all right, so what we got to do is we got to get the old leader, show everybody that he's actually turned to stone, and then show that No Name is actually his son because he looks exactly the same, which at some point in this episode, we'll get to that. So he splits up. There's one team that goes to get the statue, and then the other team goes to like distract the enemy and make a lot of noise. And so, the gun shot, and then they throw some like firecrackers, and they're doing all sorts of shenanigans to kind of like deal with that. Meanwhile, back at the village, they go to the statue, and they realize second in command, he's a crafty son of a bitch. I'll give him that. He like smashed up the statue real good. He's like, fuck it, I don't need this statue anymore. Like, it was nice having the silhouette there, but, whatever at this point. So then he is... so they have to, like, put the statue back together. But as they're putting it back together, Crafty Girl realizes that they're not going to be able to use the revitalization formula on him. It's just not going to work. So... I'm not going to be able to use revitalization. Yeah, because he's too worn or too broken or something. And then at some point, No Name, it's like picking up a hand from the smashed statue, and he like recalls everything from like when he was a baby and how his dad and his mom and everything, and it's like very emotional and sad and he's super excited to reclaim the island for his family and bring peace and prosperity and all that crap. All right, so we leave off right when the distraction crew, which is like Wrestling Girl, I can't remember if she's a wrestler or a boxer. She's some sort of fighter. Wrestling Girl, Magma, Spear Guy, and those homies are like rushing the ship despite the odds. The assault of the ship begins, And it goes okay at first. They use some trickery, some science trickery, like making a little fireworks show or whatever to get some of the guards to go off, because there's like 9 people assaulting the ship, and like, I don't know, maybe 100 guys they got to fight. You got Wrestling Girl, Magnus, and Spear Guy. They hop up. Magnus is like firing the gun like crazy. Well, he gets like 3 shots off. I think it's a 6-shooter, so he gets 3 shots off. It's kind of spooking people. Then they get the gun back. They give it to, I think his name's Yam, the police guy, and that's when they use the magnesium powder to make like a big light show, and the more people jump off, and then propagandist is like being like, "Ooh, our scary sorcerers," blah 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 blah, and then big strong guy shows up in his boat, and they're like, "Run!" And so they run all the way down to like the little prison area they're at, and strong guy and number 2 show up, and they're like, well, looks like we got you trapped here. And then Senku's like, "Oh, we got trapped. You trapped here." And then he throws a revival potion onto Hyaika, and Hyaika is from season 2. We haven't seen him at all this season. He was the main bad guy. He's the guy who like turned on the caveman guy and all that. His whole shtick is that he loves evolution and he wants only the strong to survive, which was kind of the caveman's deal as well. But this guy is like more, I don't know if he's evil per se, but he's like, he does bad things because he's such a pragmatist when it comes to, he doesn't want to revive anybody who's not going to benefit like the idea of like the strong will survive while the weak will perish. Right? And so he likes a lot of these people because they're the best of the best at what they do. But anyway, so he's the trump card, or he's not the trump card, he's the Joker, because you don't know what he's going to do. They might like at this point they're all going to die to the strong guy. So they revive him and release him from like the little prison as well, fuck it, let's see what happens. I can't remember, they turn him to stone somehow, but I don't exactly remember how they make that happen. But I do remember they make that happen. So anyway, oh, you know what? No. They didn't turn him to stone. He got turned to stone when the whole ship got turned to stone. That's right. He was just in prison chilling. Anyway, so they turn him to stone and release him, and he pops out, and Spear Guy gives him his spear because he's like a super spear guy is part of his thing, and he wears a mask. He's kind of dumb. But that's like his shtick, I guess. Anyway, they like measure each other up, and then there's a lot of conversation back and forth about like the theory and trying to measure each other and see if like the spear guy the Hyaika wants to join the big strong guy or wants to stay with Senku in the Kingdom of Science, and he's like debating back and forth. And then the big guy's like, "Oh, beauty's the only thing that matters," and that kind of gets the spear guy to be like, "All right, fuck you." So then they start fighting. Oh, at some point too, the number 2 runs off when he realizes they can turn stone into flesh, and he's like, "Ruh-roh, they're going to turn the master back into flesh, and then I'm fucked." And so he runs off, and then the rest of them run off as well and leave the ship. And at some point, Hyaika and the strong guy, they go up to the deck of the ship, and they're like, "All right, let's duel this out." And then the strong guy's like, "I fooled you. I made you think that you had a chance to beat me." And then he like hits him real hard and bangs him into the back of the ship and like knocks him out, it looks like. Meanwhile, Senku's like, "We got to go get something to help Hyaku." And so we're going back to the island. And then there's the Grandmaster's like, "Hey, take this." And he gives the stone thing, the Medusa stone, to the other strong guy who's not as strong. He's like the dumb head of the guards. And he's like, "Take this to the center of the island and use it on everybody." And then the stone lady who's been carrying it around is like, "Wait, that's wrong." And then she recalls the master talking about how they shouldn't use the stone power unnecessarily and how they shouldn't stone animals because the animals are living here with them and all this philosophical stuff. And she's like, "Wait a second. There's no way the master would tell us to like stone the whole island." And then the number 2 uses the stone on her, and then she falls into the ocean stoned. And he's like, "Aha, I'm going to win and nothing can happen." And then Muscles and his crew show up with the reconstructed master statue, and they're like, "Look, the master's here, and he's all stone, and that guy did it." And they're like, "We got to get closer. They're not going to totally believe us." But then number 2 is like, "Fuck, I got to take care of this." And then right before he's about to use the stone or whatever, he gets shot in the hand, and the stone falls out of his hand, and it's the police guy. Oh, I forgot to mention the police guy. He was going to shoot the strong guy, the enemy strong guy, but the enemy strong guy is so quick that he noticed that he was about to pull the trigger, and he knocked him into the water earlier. So he pops out of the water. He pops out of the water, and it's a great scene because it just shows the number 2 like holding the stone thing, and then it starts being covered in blood, and he's like, "What?" and then the police guy is in the water, and he's like, "You're under arrest." He's like, "Yes, I always wanted to say that." It was super badass. It was a great shot too. And so he drops the stone thing, And he's like, the fuck? And then the police guy grabs it, and he's like, now we have the Medusa technology. Da-da! And that's the end of the episode. Well, that was wrong. The battle between Strong Guy and Spear Bro continues. So even though the Strong Guy hit him really hard, it looked like he knocked him out, he did not. So we were misled, as usual. So they continue their battle. They're doing a lot of fun stuff. They're going bam, 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 bam. But clearly, the Strong Guy, and he makes a comment about this. He's like, I was born to spear. I'm like a genius spear guy. Meanwhile, the other guy, he had to train real hard and learn like a special technique, but he can't even use a special technique. I didn't mention this before because I had forgotten, but it's relevant in this episode. So we learn in season 2, Stone Wars, that the spear guy has a special technique where he uses like a thing around the spear to spin it so fast, and it makes it like almost impossible to stop or deflect or anything like that. But that he had a special device to do that with his spear that he was like stoned up with or that he crafted, but he hasn't had time to have one here. But Senku obviously knows that, and that's obviously what they're going to go do. So at some point, he gets hit and he like falls into the water and he starts running or he starts trying to escape. And then the Strong Guy, who's a really good fighter, recognizes that he's doing that on purpose. So he chases after him, and he chases, and eventually they get to like this bamboo forest. And there, Senku and crew are creating the device that he needs for his spear to do a super attack so that he can beat the Strong Guy using science, which Strong Guy calls sorcery. But So he runs past, so we see Senku and them looking through bamboo and trying to craft stuff, and then we get a whole lecture about how graphite can make things very slick, and that you can use graphite in your house of a pencil shaving, essentially, which will make things very smooth and very slick, but are very dirty, which is why it's often not used. But they use it inside the bamboo, and then they see Spear Guy and Strong Guy run past them, and then Magma, who'd used this before, he threw a stone to like cast magic spells or whatever from season 2. So he's really good at throwing things very accurately and very far. So he chucks the spear thing, and then Spear Guy is able to catch it with his spear, and then he turns to fight Strong Guy, and Strong Guy's like, the fuck? And then he starts using his special like twisting technique or whatever, and the guy is like mesmerized by it. He's able to like destroy his spear or like crack it up real good and like knock him to the ground and defeat him. And he's like, I don't understand how this happened. And it's like, it happened because we use science. And he's like, sorcery. And it's one of those things where it's funny because some point in the battle, the Spear Guy's like, I trust Senku, and he's like running and he starts laughing. He's like, I can't believe I trust those motherfuckers. So I guess he's having a conversion over. Meanwhile, the gun guy tries to use the stone thing, but he has no idea what he's doing. So he's just like, stone, and nothing happens. And then the counselor, the second in command guy, he jumps in there and he grabs it, and then he uses it. And then he grabs like another guy. He's like, oh fuck, how do I do this? And so he grabs the Strong Guy who's like in the water because he jumped out when they were using like magic, like the other, not the main Strong Guy who's like the big bad frenemy, but like the dumb Strong Guy who's like the captain of the guards, and he shoves it in his mouth, and then he tells him, hey, you got to go to the middle of the island because the stone's going off and that's the only safe place. And so he runs for it, and then Senko and crew and everybody see him running and they're like, uh-oh. So they go to like tackle him, and eventually like Muscles, the good guy Muscles, tackles him to the ground, and then they open his hand, he doesn't have it, and they're like, fuck. And he tells him that like, no, I don't have the stone, I'm running away from the stone. And they're like thinking, and they're like, oh, he probably shoved it in his mouth. Damn, god damn it. So they're all fucked because but then like people start putting 2 and 2 together, and at some point the guy who's really good at hearing and archery, he figures out that it's voice activated, and so you have to give it like a space and a time limit. And then Bromeister, the assistant guy, he was like, when we got stoned last time, I was observing. So and he recalls while they're running to Senku everything that he learned about it, and they're able to like put 1 and 1 and 2 and 3 together and all this stuff. And eventually they make a lineup of statues, like all the science team, so that Senku doesn't get stoned, right? And that, if you remember, that worked because it worked with the spy girl before with when they used it on the ship. He was able to block and help the spy girl, the little girl, not get turned to stone by like being in the way. So they put all like the information together, and then they're able to save Senku. But we don't realize that at first. At first, it just seems like the whole island gets turned into stone. It's like, oh, sad upon us. And then the counselor guys, he's walking up and he's like, ooh, tee-hee-hee, tee-hee-hee. I'm going to find some of this revival potion, and I'll revive them, one of their guys, and I'll torture him until he tells me how to make more revival potion, and I'll get my whole kingdom back, and it'll be fantastic, and I'm the best. And then he gets up to where all the guys are at, like the Strong Guy who had the thing in his stomach, and he sees he sees No Name, Senjo or whatever, and he's like, oh, he looks just like the master. Oh, I remember he did have a son, and like there was a woman who grabbed him after I turned the master into stone, because I recall that like he has a photographic memory because he's got like the 100 tails genetically encoded into like his system, or some old shonen bullshit. That's why he's so smart. That's why he's able to like remember everything. It's because of the 100 tails, and just like it expanded his ability to think, and his brain power and all that good stuff. So he smashes the guy who had the Medusa stone in his stomach and takes it. He's like, do, and he's wandering around. And then he notices, this is when he notices all the guys lined up in a row. And then he's like, that's weird. And then he sees footprints, and he's like, huh. So he follows it back to the lab, and he hears noises coming in there from like the earring that he's wearing. So he heads in there, and then Senku's like 5 meters 1 second. And nothing happens, but he drops a Medusa stone and like, oh fuck, and nothing happens. And then Senku's like standing up on a ledge, and he's like, oh, I guess I got to be closer to make it happen. And the guy's like, how are you alive? And he's like, science, motherfucker. Hell yeah. So Senku's got Ibarra, I think is his name, number 2. He's got him to rights. He's what's this crazy thing going on here at this gate? Anyway. So he uses science to self-drive his car, his like mobile lab, to crash into the guy. And then he hops down to pick up the Medusa thing, and he's like, where are you at? Oh, well, whatever. And then he's about to use the stone. He's going to like say something just in case to make sure it works or to do whatever. And then he gets stabbed in the arm. Oh no, the guy's fine. He mentioned something about being a warrior and like he can take that shit, like whatever. He's not worried about nothing. And then Senku's like, fuck. And so he starts to run. And the guy's chasing him, and they chase him through. Oh, he says, he's like, you didn't think I'd come prepared after I saw your fucking gun that you were shooting off? I'm wearing armor, motherfucker. And I'm like, you got hit by a car, bro. Whatever. So then number 2, I think it's Ibarra. Ibarra chases him through the woods and then to like a cliff, the same cliff where they had like their battle previously. And then Senku's sitting there like talking to something in his little thing, and then he stands up and he like smirks at him, and they chat back and forth and yada yada, and then he throws the fucking Medusa thing at Senku, and then we get like a flashback because he's like, wait a second, something's amiss. And so we get a little flashback, and the flashback is right before Senku started running off, he threw like his revitalization potion on the navigator, who then went and got the drone and then had like followed them, and then they've been communicating through like the earring and like the talking thing the whole time. And so then the drone goes up, and they go back and forth with that. Excuse me. And there's like the guy, we get Ibarra thinking, we get Senku thinking, and they're both like, oh, that guy thinks he's so smart, he thinks he's so smart, blah, 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 blah. And so they're playing tug of war, and the navigator and Senku are not as strong as the Ibarra guy. And so, but that's like part of the plan for Senku, because then they let go, and then the Medusa thing starts going towards him, but then Ibarra takes off his like crazy hat that he's wearing this whole time, and he chucks it, and he hits the Medusa thing, which then is going to them, and he's like, the worst part, and he says out loud, the best part about people think they're smart is that they're not actually smart. It's easy to trick them. And then all of a sudden, the navigator comes flying at the Medusa thing. He grabs it, turns to stone, obviously, and then crumbles, like crashes into the ground right in front of Ibarra. And Ibarra's like, oh, whatever, I'll just do it again. And so he picks up the thing, he picks up the Medusa thing, and then Senku's like, you're exactly right. And then he like whispers into like his telecommunication device. And what Ibarra didn't realize is that the earring is right there attached to the it's right there attached to the Medusa device. And so Senku's like, 3 meters 1 second or whatever. And then Ibarra finally turns to stone. And so that was pretty epic. Like that's the whole episode essentially, is then this back and forth and this like the final boss battle. And this guy's pretty tough. He's a very good final boss. Because they didn't have to rely on it was like a battle of wits, even though their guy's stronger. And then Senku didn't just win; he had to like improvise several times, to use his wits and all this stuff. And there's a whole thing about him counting and like timing and like all this stuff. So it was all very, very good. Oh, and we get the flashback. So I was wrong. They didn't block the stone blast from hitting him. What they did is they lined up perfectly apart from each other so that Senku could calculate how fast the stone thing is going, so that he could essentially toss the revival fluid into the air and then turn into stone, and then it would like come crashing down on him right like the perfect moment, so that he would like as the petrification beam is like going through him, it's like the potion's working like backwards, so it's not moving too fast, and so his like, his hand gets turned to stone, and then it starts going up his arm, and then the potion like crashes on his hand, and then it starts covering the whole thing, because it's part of the thing is he has this whole thing where it's like, well, the if I do the solution too soon, it's not going to work, and it's got to like cover everything, and that's kind of wishy-washy because at first like, oh, he's going to crash on his head and then pour down his whole body or whatever. But then it seems like it just crashes on like his arm, but his arm's held high, so it's dripping down his whole body or whatever. Anyway, it works. That's all that matters, and it's cool. It's badass. All right, so then we get this very like touching scene at the end there, because then it's like Senku just walking back through the island, and everyone's turned to stone, but he's like the only one not turned to stone. And so he's just like thinking, and he's remembering. He's like, man, I'm all alone. And then he's thinking back to like when he first came through, and like there was nobody, and it was just him, and he spent like a year or so just like surviving on his own, trying to figure out like a solution to cure the stone thing, so that he could start bringing people back. And then he's like sitting at like the center of the island, or sitting at somewhere, and he's just like thinking about it. And then he gets a call from the previous island, and it's the priestess lady, and she's like, hey Senku, we're just checking in, are you guys okay? And he's like, yeah. And then he thinks to himself, he's like, I'm okay, because I'm not alone. This time I'm not alone. And that's in the episode. And it's like, yeah, boy, fuck yeah. It's so good. This show is so fucking good. Oh man. But yeah, so there you go. Cool. Okay. All right, sweet ass victory. So after his like chilling and just imagining, enjoying his like victory, Senku gets back to work. He revives everybody. He starts off reviving the assistant, and then he starts reviving other people, and they're trying to figure, like, it's step by step. He's not just reviving everybody immediately. He starts reviving people that are essential for like, he revives the assistant because he's the most helpful, and then he revives. And then they chit chat, and he explains everything that happened. It's like, awesome, I'm glad our plan worked, and yada yada. And the guy's like stoned now, and all this stuff. And he's like, oh, that's so interesting. That the priestess sent you a message. I wonder why. She wouldn't just do that. I mean, she hasn't sent us a message like this whole time. Like, why all of a sudden is she reaching out? There must be something wrong. And so like, all right, let's go fix the radio. And then so they resurrect like the craftsman and everyone else who can like work. Like they get the science team back up so they can start working on that. And then they start getting other people back up so they can start repairing the rest of the ship and getting like food and all that stuff. And so they eventually they resurrect like everybody. The only people that aren't resurrected by the end of the season, because there's like 3 episodes that are kind of all like an epilogue sort of story, which is what I'm talking about here with like episodes 20 through 22. So some of that stuff's going to be merged, or I'm going to like do things slightly out of order because I watched all 3 kind of back to back. Okay, so they're working on that, and then everyone's they're starting to get just the people. The only people that aren't bringing back up are the second in command guy from the old order, the Ibarra, I think, and then like Mash, the really strong guy, and then the spear guy. They're kind of leaving them as stones for now. Okay, so then they rebuild the radio stuff in the ship, and then at that point they hear Y-Man. Y-Man is the voice, but this time someone's like, that's your voice, Senku. And what the voice is saying, it's saying 12,800 meters 1 second or whatever, and then someone's like, holy cow, they're trying to activate like the Medusa stone and turn us all into stone. And then Senku's like, it's not just us, that number, the 12,000 whatever, is the size of the earth. So this clearly done, like, this is what they did before, right? They use this device, this literal like crazy device, to turn everyone on the planet to stone, and they're trying to do it again for reasons unknown. And when they called Ruri back, she was like, well, we started hearing a weird voice, so we just want to make sure you were okay. And then that's when the voice pops on, and they hear that. And then the ear guy, the listening guy, the radar guy, it's all the same, the bow guy, he has a lot of skills. He mentions that it's a computer, like it's synthetic. He says literally, this is synthetic, which is interesting. And they're like, we gotta figure out where it's coming from. So they start working on building like a, do they build that right at this point? Well, anyway, they eventually build the radio tower, so this island can stay in communication with them, as well as stay in communication with their new allies, the people on the original island. But at some point, they triangulate and they figure out, like between Senku, the navigator, and the listening guy, the radar guy, they figure out that the signal is coming from the moon. Right, so now they got to get to the moon, and so that means they got to build a spaceship and go to the moon. And yep, that's what's happening next. Genius. Anyway, while they're doing that, they're like searching through stuff. They're trying to find out more information about the stone, but like no one really knows what's going on. But then at some point, someone like drags up a stone that's super old under the water, and they're like, "Hey, I found this guy, and he's got a tattoo of like the Medusa thing on his skin." And so they resurrect him, and he's like from 200 years ago, and he tells a story about how one day they were just chilling, and then all these like Medusa stones like fell from the sky and started turning everyone into stone. Oh, it was after they found this guy, and they hear that. That's when they're like, "Oh, let's see." And then Senku's like, "That makes sense." And everyone's like, "Nani desu ka?" And so then that's when they're like, it's coming from the moon. Like, to stop this from happening, to like be able to bring everybody back and like be safe, we have to go to the moon to stop this thing, whatever is going on up there. And this guy's a super strong warrior. Like, everybody's like a super strong warrior, right? It's like another ridiculously strong warrior. And then his old master, before he got turned to stone, looks just like the coward, and so he like pledges allegiance to the coward, and the coward's ancestor, it was literally like the coward's ancestor was this guy's master, so and then he gets like a big dick about it, and it's like talking shit to people and stuff. Not a lot, but it's like used for comedic effect. But yeah, so, and he talked about how these things fell and they turned a bunch of people to stone, and then his master ordered him to go collect all of them and smash them. So they destroyed all of them but like this one, supposedly. Yeah, so they discover the thing. Start looking at my notes. Time for space. All right. So then they start reviving everybody and helping them get set up. And like I said, they get them a radio tower and all this stuff. And they talk about how they want allies. They need allies. They need people here to help build ship stuff. They need people back in the other island. And that they're going to have to start going all over the world to start reviving people and building like communities and cities, because they're going to need items from all over the world to build the spaceship and to get to the moon, and they can't just all do it with like their limited number. And then there's some concerns about like the Dunbar principle, which I mentioned before, which is like the limit of humans' ability to like remember faces and to like kind of keep control is around 150 people. And once you have more than 150 people in like essentially like a commune, like a community, kind of a communist utopia, the thing falls apart, because then once you hit that 150 roughly, that's when you start having like factions. And once you have factions, people have different opinions about things, and then you have to have like a centralized government with like force, or otherwise everything falls apart. That's like the whole concept. I think it's Dunbar principle. I think that's what it's called. But yeah, that's something I've read about outside of this as well. So that's definitely a thing, right? So No Name, who is the clear son of the previous master, he kind of takes charge of the island, and like all the warriors who like recognize him and were like under the old master, they swear allegiance immediately, so he takes control like pretty quick. But then the science team and the outsiders, essentially Senku and crew, are like, we gotta build some trust so that we can make sure we stay allies with everybody here, because a lot of these people are like, the fuck is going on? Right? They had like nothing to do with like all the main plot story. Like, there's a bunch of different little tribes like all over the island, and they're just like, what the fuck's happening? Like, new leadership? Why? What's happening? So they put on this thing, and they like give them cotton candy and ramen, like all the stuff they were building and making delicious food in like the previous thing, like season 2 in the other island. They're doing here, and then Senku like puts together fireworks, and they do like a big fireworks show, and Propagandist has like this sweet little like commentary about like the Japanese and how they view fireworks and how it brings people together and reminds us of yada yada yada, and how that's going to be the new, that's going to bring us together and help everybody be good and have a good life and do all that stuff again. And then they're talking about the spaceship stuff some more, and Senku's like, all right, so we're gonna build a spaceship, but it's only gonna be able to take like 3 people up, and so obviously we need a navigator, and that's gonna be the navigator guy, right, the pirate king. And then we're going to need someone who is very profound in science and knowledge and blah, 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 blah. And everyone's like, okay, Senku. Okay. And then who's the last one? He's going to need a warrior. And then they're kind of discussing that. And he's like, no, I know exactly the warrior to be. And then it's like the what is it? The greatest high school caveman high schooler or whatever, who's the bad guy. And it's like a frenemy of Senku who they froze because he got mortally wounded previously. And now they have the stone, so they can stone him up, and then they can revival fluid him. So it'll heal everything. Right, because that's how that shit works in this universe. So they leave No Name in charge, Soya, I think it's his name, and they all gather in the ship, and they're like, we'll be back, but you just keep doing what you're doing and have a good time. And they have the radio tower, so we'll stay in communication, and you can stay in communication. And then No Name sends the warrior lady with the stone with them, because she's a great warrior too. And at some point, her and Gorilla Girl Kohaku were like fighting and practicing, and so they're kind of equally matched-ish. Okay. So they head back home, and when they get there, they get, it's the priestess lady's there, along with the caveman's little sister, and everyone's so happy. And then they go immediately over to the thing, and Senku talks about, someone mentions like, hey, you're the only one who still has all their scars from the stone, because it's one of the things when you're been stoned for like 3,000 years or whatever, like just parts of the stone are gonna like chip off or fall, right? And so because of that, it leaves like these kind of odd scars, because while you're being healed and when you recover, there's aspects of, like your skin or whatever, they're just like not there or whatever. That's where everyone, if you watch some of the show, like they all have like these unique kind of looking scars or marks or whatever, except now they all got frozen and then unfrozen again. That healed all that, except Senku. And someone mentions it, like, hey, why didn't you do your thing and get rid of your scars? And he's like, this thing only has enough juice for like one person. And then the warrior lady remembers that like when the old master was talking about it, he was like, hey, if you ever use this, make sure you never use it on a large scale, because it won't work, essentially. And then they put that information to use, and it's like, oh, it has like a battery charge, and like he like overexerted it. So hopefully they have enough for like one more charge. Because he even mentions that when he used it on Ibarra, he told it to do like 3 meters and only did like 2 meters or something, so it didn't even do the full thing. Like the full radius. So with that information, they head in, and then they have like a cute little scene where like the sister's like, I believe, and she holds the thing on her brother, and she's like, I know it'll do it, I know it'll freeze him, and then we can cure him. And then Strong Guy and Crafty Girl, I think it's Crafty Girl, a few people like put their hands on the stone there, and they're it works. So it stones him up, and then they heal him, and then he's healed. And then they have a conversation about like what needs to happen, and he's like, I'm going to do it. And then he gets challenged immediately by the old-timey guy, who's like the coward's servant, and he beats the shit out of him, like the caveman guy does. It's like Tsukasa. I think it's Tsukasa. So it's all very sweet and all very fun. And then Senko has the crafty people, like the old man and the crafty girl. They build like a working globe, which is super impressive. And he has like little cities everywhere where they need to get like materials. And he's like, this is what we're doing, and we're gonna go get all this stuff, and we're gonna be gone for like a year or more, because we gotta sail over the world and like get these like settlements set up and get like the materials and whatnot. And then they discuss, that some more, and that, even though these different communities, they're going to have different standards, and they might not all get along and whatnot, we got to do it, because we got to get to the moon, and like the only way to bring civilization back is to start with that, and then go to the moon and take care of whatever's going on there, and then we can do it. And they're like, all right, we're going to do it. And so then they all start getting aboard, and like, where are we going first? And he's like, we're going to America, the corn capital of the world, because they're going to get as much alcohol as they can, so they can have like unlimited revival fluid, and bring the whole world back. And it's like da da da, and then it's like the end of season 3, and they play the fun music, and like the ending thing, which used to be in like sepia tones, like you were drawing on a scroll, is now all in color, and it's super fun, and hooray, yay, excellent. Okay, so that show. Oh, one more thing. There's still like some kind of like not awkward, but it's one of those things where like Kohaku and Senku have some sort of relationship. And it doesn't seem like it's romantic, but it could definitely be going that way. Like when she gets revived, she immediately like leaps into his arms, right? And then you see them a couple times just like by themselves, like chit-chatting or whatever. So there's definitely something there. Anyway, I like that. I hope it does go somewhere. But that being said, we go back to that's it. So I have read that they're already working on a 4th season, and that the 4th season is the last season. So that'll be fun. I think it's based on a manga that's already done. So I guess if you really wanted to, you could like look it up somewhere and figure it out or order it or whatever. But yeah, the Dr. Stone continues to be excellent across the board. I really enjoy this. I'm excited for season 4 and the wrap up. It's always nice when things wrap up and don't go on for 10,000 episodes, One Piece, even though you're also excellent. It's just nice to like have a little wrap, right? And I point out One Piece specifically because Dragon Ball is like 6 different shows. So if you just watch Dragon Ball Z, that has an ending, and then it moves. There's like other shit like GT and Super and what is it? There's another Instinct or whatever that are all kind of this. They're all different-ish, right? They're not. You can like wrap it up with like the Frieza stuff and whatever goes on beyond that, and then it's like, all right, Dragon Ball Z is over, and you never have to watch it again. You get like a complete story. I guess they're doing a new one where they go through like different dimensions or something. I don't know. That could be weird or good. We'll see. But yeah, this science-y like shonen anime is excellent. I love every second of it, and it's a pleasure. So definitely highly recommended. Check it out, and go ahead, like, share, subscribe, comment, and I will catch you guys later.